Colossians 1 verse 18. Jesus is the firstborn from the dead, to become the beginning of the church, the firstborn among many brethren.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive is going to be pretty interesting. We're taking a look at Colossians 1.18 and this whole idea of the church of the firstborn. Now, this source material we're looking at, it comes from a biblical Unitarian viewpoint. So that might be new to some of you listening.
Yeah, not the most common perspective you hear.
Exactly. But it basically suggests that Jesus, he is the beginning of this special group, this church, and it's made up of all those people God calls to, live righteously.
Okay, so a community set apart.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Does this verse, Colossians 1.18, point to a different way of understanding what Jesus' role is all about, especially when you bring in this whole concept of a new creation?
Ooh, yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Right, so let's duck in. What jumps out at you right away from the source material?
Well, the first thing that grabbed my attention was the emphasis on the word beginning. It's not necessarily saying Jesus created the entire universe, like some traditional interpretations might say. It's more focused on the idea that he's the starting point of something new and specific.
Okay, so a new beginning, but not necessarily the beginning.
Right, exactly.
And the source actually dives into the original Greek of Colossians 1.18 to kind of back that up. They point out that the word things, it isn't actually there in the original text.
Interesting.
So for those of us who, haven't exactly mastered ancient Greek, what's the key takeaway here?
Well, essentially, the source is suggesting that Jesus' importance, his preeminence, it's not so much about ruling over physical things, material possessions. It's more about this connection he has to the church, to this group, who are called to live righteously.
Okay, so it's about his leadership of this group striving for righteousness. But then it gets even more intriguing when the source brings in this idea of Jesus being the firstborn from the dead.
Right. That's a key concept here.
What's the connection between that idea and everything else we've been talking about?
That's where this whole new creation concept comes in.
Okay.
The source links firstborn from the dead to the idea that Jesus, he's the first of a brand new kind of being, someone who's been completely transformed spiritually and brought into alignment with God. It's less about a physical resurrection and more about a profound shift in our spiritual nature.
So you're saying it's not just about, coming back to life physically. It's about becoming something entirely new.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of being, totally focused on righteousness. And to support this, the source points us to Revelation 3.14, where it calls Jesus the beginning of the creation of God. But then it asks us to consider, what kind of creation are we really talking about here?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing we're not talking about mountains and rivers at this point.
You got it. The source argues that, this Foss is referring to, the creation of new creatures made in God's image. Now, of course, we're not talking about physical image here. It's all about a spiritual transformation.
So it's like a spiritual rebirth, a complete transformation from the inside out.
Exactly. And this is where that biblical Unitarian perspective that we mentioned earlier, it really starts to come into play.
Okay, can you unpack that a bit more for me and for everyone listening? What does this perspective say about Jesus and his role in all of this?
Sure. So biblical Unitarianism, it really emphasizes the distinction between God the Father and Jesus. It sees Jesus as God's Son, created to carry out God's will, and ultimately to lead this new creation.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, this view sees Jesus as the first and most important part of this new spiritual creation, leading those who are striving for righteousness. Now, it's important for us to remember that this is just one interpretation of these verses. There are lots of different viewpoints out there.
Absolutely. And this source is giving us a particular lens to look through, a particular way to understand these verses. And it's definitely a thought-provoking one.
Oh, it is, for sure. And it leaves me with so many questions. Like, if Jesus is the beginning of this new creation, the firstborn, the prototype, what does that actually mean for us? What does it mean to be a part of it? What does it mean for our own spiritual journeys? I guess those are the questions we'll be exploring next.
Exactly. We'll be delving deeper into what this new creation really looks like and what it means to be a part of the Church of the Firstborn, according to the source. So stay tuned. All right. So we've established this idea that Jesus is the start of something new. But what does this new creation look like in practice? I think that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. This whole idea of spiritual transformation is pretty mind-blowing. Does the source give us any specifics about what being a part of this new creation actually involves?
It does, yeah. The source ties this new way of being to the concept of the Church of the Firstborn. And it suggests that this church, it isn't about a building or a denomination. It's about all the people who God calls to walk in righteousness. They're the ones who have experienced this spiritual rebirth and are trying to live according to God's will.
So is it exclusive then? Like, is it only for people who fit a certain mold or believe specific things? What about everyone else?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think it's something each listener has to grapple with on their own. The source doesn't explicitly address that, but it does put a lot of emphasis on righteousness as like a defining characteristic of this new way of being.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think about the concept of being born again, which you hear a lot in some Christian circles. Is this source kind of suggesting a new way of looking at that idea?
It definitely presents a fresh perspective. It seems to be saying that being born again, it's not just about accepting a set of beliefs or going through a ritual. It's about a fundamental change in our very nature, a transformation that comes from God's grace and leads us towards a life of righteousness.
That's powerful. So if Jesus is the firstborn from the dead, the first to go through this transformation, does that mean he's like the blueprint for this new way of being?
Precisely. The source points to Jesus as the prototype, the one who shows us what's possible through this spiritual shift. He's the firstborn among many brethren, suggesting that others can follow in his footsteps.
Okay, so we're seeing this idea of Jesus as a model, a guide for this new way of being. But something the source keeps coming back to is the fact that the word things isn't in the original Greek of Colossians 1.18. Why do you think the author emphasizes that so much?
I think it's crucial because it really reinforces this idea that Jesus' preeminence isn't about earthly power or possessions. It's about his connection to the church, to those who are striving for righteousness. His leadership is spiritual, not material.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. It changes how we understand Jesus' role, doesn't it? It suggests that his main focus is the spiritual development of those who are called to righteousness.
Absolutely. And it all ties back into that idea of him being the faithful and true witness we talked about earlier. He's not some distant ruler. He's an example, a model for us to follow in our own pursuit of righteousness.
So it's less about worshiping him and more about emulating him, trying to live like he did.
Exactly. It's about aligning our lives with his teachings and embodying the qualities that he exemplified.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Jesus as the beginning, the model, the leader of this new way of being centered on righteousness and a connection with God. But I'm still curious about what this new creation actually entails.
Well, remember how the source uses Revelation 3.13 to support this idea. It mentions Jesus being the beginning of the creation of God, but the source challenges the traditional interpretation of that verse, which often links it to the creation of the physical universe.
So if it's not about stars and planets, then what's it about?
The source argues that it points to something much deeper, something internal. It's about the creation of new creatures, individuals who have been transformed spiritually through their connection with Jesus. It's not a physical rebirth, but a spiritual awakening.
That's pretty radical. I'm not sure I fully get it yet, but it's definitely fascinating. So are you saying that this new creation is about an inner transformation, a change in our consciousness?
Exactly. It's about moving from spiritual darkness into a new reality characterized by righteousness, love, and a deep connection with God.
You know, it makes me think about how the source mentions the dead becoming new creatures. Since Jesus was the firstborn. It's like humanity's being offered a second chance, a chance to become something more than what we are now.
That's a really insightful way to put it. The source seems to be suggesting that through Jesus, a new order of beings is emerging, individuals who have been transformed by God's grace and made in his image spiritually, of course.
So it's not just about going to heaven after we die, but about experiencing a kind of heaven on earth, a spiritual rebirth that changes how we live and interact with the world around us.
That's a beautiful way to summarize it. And it raises some important questions about our own spiritual journeys. Are we just going through the motions? Or are we actively participating in this transformation? Are we choosing to align ourselves with this new creation?
Those are some big questions. I have to admit, I'm still wrapping my head around this whole new creation concept, but I'm definitely intrigued.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But remember, this is a deep dive, and we're here to unpack these complex ideas together. And who knows, maybe along the way, we'll discover something new about ourselves and our own spiritual paths.
So we've been talking about this new creation and what it means to be a part of the Church of the Firstborn. But I'm still trying to grasp the practical side of it all. What does it actually look like to live in this new reality day to day?
Well, the source gives us some clues by focusing on Jesus's role as the faithful and true witness. Remember, we touched on that earlier.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not just about his leadership position. It's about him actually embodying God's qualities.
Right, so it's about more than just saying you believe. It's about actually trying to live like Jesus did.
Exactly. And the source suggests that this witness, this example that Jesus set, is especially crucial because of the spiritual opposition in the world, represented by Satan and those fallen angels. It's like there's this cosmic battle going on. And Jesus, as the firstborn of a new creation, stands as this beacon of righteousness.
Wow, that's a pretty intense image. So are you saying that when we try to live righteously, when we try to align ourselves with God's will, we're actually playing a part in this cosmic struggle?
That's a really interesting way to think about it. The source definitely emphasizes that we're not just passive bystanders in the spiritual reality. We have choices to make. And those choices have real consequences. By striving to live righteously, we're choosing to side with Jesus and the forces of good.
So it's not just about personal salvation, but about actively fighting for good over evil.
You could put it that way. And it suggests that this transformation, this process of becoming a new creation, it's not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong commitment to becoming more like Christ every single day.
That's definitely a challenge, but it's also incredibly inspiring. If we can really grasp the idea that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, that we're part of a cosmic purpose, I mean, that could totally change how we view life.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that idea of Jesus as the head of the church. He's not just some distant figurehead. He's actively guiding and empowering his followers to live out his teachings and spread his influence throughout the world.
So it's about more than just going to church or following rules. It's about actually living out Christ's values and making a real difference.
Exactly. The church in this context, it's not just a building or an institution, it's a community of people who are striving to embody Christ's teachings and create a more just and compassionate world.
It's like we're all pieces of a puzzle, coming together to create this bigger picture of God's kingdom right here on earth.
I love that analogy. It really highlights how important unity and collaboration are. We're not meant to go through this alone. We need each other to learn and grow and support one another on this journey.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking differently about salvation. It's not just about escaping hell or going to heaven when we die. It's about being a part of something so much bigger, something that goes beyond our individual lives.
That's it, exactly. It's about participating in the creation of a new reality, a reality defined by righteousness, love, and justice. It's about bringing heaven to earth, like you said.
And that's both a challenge and an incredible honor. We have this opportunity to be agents of change, to make a real difference in the world by embodying the values of this new creation.
What stands out to you most about this idea of the Church of the Firstborn? What resonates with you and what challenges you?
For me, it's the emphasis on righteousness. It's not just about believing the right things. It's about living in a way that reflects God's character. It's about bringing his love and justice into the world through our actions.
That's a really powerful takeaway, and it highlights the practical side of this perspective. It's not just abstract ideas, it's about how we live our lives, how we treat each other, how we interact with the world around us.
It's about putting our faith into action, being the change we want to see.
Exactly, and that's where the real work lies. It's easy to talk about righteousness, but actually living it out consistently, that's the challenge.
It's a journey, not a destination. We're all works in progress, but we have the guidance and support of Jesus, the head of the church, to help us along the way.
That's a great point. It brings us right back to the source's main message. Jesus, as the firstborn from the dead, has shown us the way forward. He's shown us what's possible and given us everything we need to follow in his footsteps.
So it's not about just admiring Jesus. It's about becoming more like him, allowing his love and grace to transform us.
Precisely. And by doing so, we become part of this new creation, this Church of the Firstborn, and contribute to the building of God's kingdom, right here and now.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. It's really challenged me to think differently about Jesus, about the church, and about my own spiritual journey.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you and with everyone listening. And remember, this is just one perspective on a very complex topic. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for truth.
That's great advice. I encourage all of you listening to do just that. Dive into the scriptures, wrestle with these ideas.
And see what resonates with you. This journey of faith is an ongoing adventure. There's always more to learn and discover.
So keep seeking, keep growing, and keep striving to be the best versions of yourselves, the versions God created you to be.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Church of the Firstborn. Until next time, keep exploring.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.